You picture an ancient battle. Two armies clashing under a dusty sky. Thousands of men, clanging bronze. A chaos so massive it shakes the ground. That's the image movies gave you. But the real scale of ancient warfare is stranger, smaller in some ways, and far more brutal in others than anything Hollywood ever showed you. Start with a number that sounds almost too small to matter. Archaeologist Lawrence Keeley, in his landmark study of prehistoric conflict, found that many early tribal wars involved raiding parties of only 10 to 30 men. Not armies, not legions, small groups slipping through the dark, striking a rival camp, then vanishing before dawn. That doesn't sound like war the way you imagine it. But here's the twist that should stop you cold. Keeley calculated that these small-scale prehistoric conflicts often produce death rates far higher, proportionally, than modern warfare. In some tribal societies he studied, up to 25% of adult male deaths came from violence. Compare that to the 20th century, an era that includes 2 world wars, where violent death accounted for roughly 1 to 2% of the population. Read that again. A handful of men with stone tools, fighting in small raids you'd barely call a war today, killed a larger share of their population than the deadliest century in human history, managed with tanks, bombs, and machine guns. So how did warfare get bigger? And when it did get bigger, just how big did it actually become? To answer that, you need to understand what changed. Small raiding bands don't need much. No supply chains, no command structure. Just a handful of warriors, a target, and the element of surprise. But once humans built cities, once they built states with taxes, granaries, and bureaucracies, something new became possible: the standing army. Historian Ian Morris, who has spent his career studying how warfare shaped civilizations, argues that the rise of large, organized states is what allowed war to scale up dramatically. States could feed thousands of soldiers. States could arm them uniformly. States could march them hundreds of miles and keep them fighting for months. A raiding party can't do that. An empire can. Consider one of the earliest documented large battles in history, the Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BCE between the Egyptian and Hittite empires. Egyptian records carved onto temple walls under Ramesses II claim tens of thousands of soldiers and thousands of chariots on each side. Modern historians are more cautious with those numbers, since ancient rulers loved exaggerating their own glory, but even skeptical estimates put the combined forces somewhere in the range of 30 to 40,000 men. For the Bronze Age, that's a genuinely staggering concentration of manpower, all coordinated, fed, and moved across hundreds of miles of desert. But scale isn't only about how many soldiers show up. It's also about how far the consequences reach. By the time you get to the classical world, warfare had become something closer to what you might picture. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Alexander the Great faced the Persian king Darius III. Ancient sources claim the Persian army numbered in the hundreds of thousands, though most modern historians think the real figure was likely closer to 50 to 100,000, still enormous for the era. What matters is what this battle represented: an empire capable of mobilizing soldiers from dozens of different regions, cultures, and languages, all funneled into a single coordinated force. This is where archaeologist and anthropologist Stephen LeBlanc offers a crucial correction to how you probably think about ancient war. LeBlanc's research pushes back against the old assumption that prehistoric and early ancient societies were mostly peaceful, with organized large-scale warfare only emerging as a civilized innovation. His analysis of skeletal remains, fortifications, and settlement patterns across multiple ancient cultures shows that violence, sometimes organized and sustained, appears remarkably early in the archaeological record, long before empires existed to formalize it. In other words, the appetite for large-scale, coordinated violence wasn't invented by empires. Empires simply gave that appetite far more efficient tools. So picture the true arc of ancient warfare this way. It begins small, brutal, and personal. Raids by a few dozen men, but proportionally more lethal to a community than almost anything that came after. Then, as agriculture created surplus food, and surplus food created cities, and cities created states, war scaled upward. Armies stopped being war bands and started being institutions, with training, supply lines, chains of command, and the ability to sustain campaigns for months or years. By the height of the Roman Empire, the scale had become almost industrial. At its peak, Rome maintained a standing military of roughly 300 to 400,000 soldiers spread across an empire stretching from Britain to the edge of Persia. That wasn't a single battle. That was a permanent professional military apparatus funded through taxation, organized through bureaucracy, and capable of projecting force across an area larger than the continental United States. Here's what should genuinely unsettle you about this progression. As warfare scaled up in size, it didn't necessarily become proportionally deadlier to the individual soldier. In fact, in many periods, casualty rates within large formal battles were lower than the raw, personal brutality of small-scale tribal raiding. Formal armies had structure. They had retreat. They had negotiated surrenders and prisoner exchanges. A tribal raid often had none of that. When your enemy was your neighbor and the fight was deeply personal, there was frequently no mechanism for mercy at all. So the terrifying truth isn't that ancient warfare got bigger and bloodier in a straight line. It's that scale and brutality don't move together the way you'd assume. Small wars could be more lethal per capita. Large wars could be more lethal in raw numbers, while sometimes being comparatively more survivable for any single participant caught inside them. What connects all of it, from a 10-man raiding party slipping through the dark to a Roman legion marching in formation, is the same underlying force: human groups organizing violence at whatever scale their social structure could support. A hunting band could organize 10 men, a chiefdom could organize hundreds, an empire could organize hundreds of thousands. The math of violence simply scaled with the math of organization. And that connection between social complexity and the scale of war is still true today. The size of any conflict you'll ever witness isn't really a measure of how much humans want to fight. It's a measure of how large a group of humans can be organized to act as one. So the next time you picture an ancient battlefield, don't just picture the size of the crowd. Picture the invisible architecture behind it, the granaries that fed it, the roads that moved it, the bureaucracy that counted it, and the raw, older instinct underneath it all. The same instinct that once sent 30 men slipping quietly toward a rival camp in the dark, long before anyone thought to call it an army at all. The more we learn about the past, the better we understand ourselves. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Phoenix Primeval for more fascinating stories from history, science, and human evolution. Thanks for watching.